When I launched this podcast 2 weeks ago, it was literally me, an iPhone, no mic, no fancy setup, no big team. Just raw ideas, raw voice, and a fire in my gut to finally tell the truth about the crimes no one talks about. And somehow you found it. You didn't just download a podcast. You found a place where your story is believed. You showed up. You listened. You shared. And because of you, the Lovebombed hit over 300 downloads in the first 2 weeks. No ads, no production team, no backing. Just a mission and a truth too loud to ignore. You helped build something real, and you did it fast. So fast. It forced me to level up overnight. New mic, new setup, new momentum. But the mission stayed the same. To name what they tried to bury. And if you're here listening, sharing, speaking the truth out loud, you're already part of this movement. And I need you to hear me when I say this. It matters. You matter. Your voice matters. All right, bombshell. Now let's talk about what brought us all here. Because whether or not you've ever been in a relationship with a narcissist, whether or not you've ever heard the term love bombing before this show, you've felt the ripples. Maybe it was you. Maybe it was someone you love. But almost everyone knows this story. A relationship that started fast, that felt a little too good to be true, where the highs were dizzying and the lows didn't make sense until they did. And what's underneath that kind of love isn't love. It's strategy. It's performance. It's the setup behind the crime. This episode isn't just about narcissists. It's not just about red flags or trauma patterns or diagnostic labels. It's about the way false love is used to gain access. The way control hides inside adoration. The way someone can look like your soulmate and turn out to be the one who dismantles your sense of self. Because when love is used as a weapon, it doesn't just leave you hurt. It leaves you altered. And today, we're going back to where it all began. Before the betrayal, before the discard, before the silence. We're going back to the first crime. The love bomb. Every crime begins with a setup. But the crimes we investigate here, they're not written in blood, at least not at first. They're written in promises, in adrenaline-laced I love yous, in the way they study you like a subject and then mirror you like a soulmate. This isn't the kind of danger that storms in like a villain. It's the kind that knocks gently, grins warmly, and calls itself destiny. It feels like safety. It feels like being chosen. But what you're actually experiencing is the weaponization of closeness. Love bombing is the opening act of a psychological crime. An engineered flood of affection designed to bypass your instincts, override your logic, and disarm your defenses before you've ever seen the threat. It's not love, it's strategy. Every grand gesture, every soulmate confession, every future fantasy woven into your life like a fairy tale. None of it is spontaneous. It's all part of the script. A blueprint drawn in secrecy. A campaign hidden inside a confession. A con sealed with a kiss. And by the time you realize you were a mark, the crime is already well underway. Love bombing is idealization with intent. And that intent is everything. Because this isn't just someone being really into you. It's not excitement. It's not chemistry. It's access. It's control. It's power cloaked in adoration. And it's deliberate. Before the first betrayal, before the first silent treatment, before the first wound you can name, there was a performance. It didn't explode. It eroded. Not in a dramatic way. Not with yelling or slammed doors or betrayal I could name. No. The first sign came wrapped in silence. The kind that's cold, not quiet. He didn't ghost me. He just pulled back. Slower replies, less warmth. A subtle chill behind the same smile. It started the night I said no. Not to something big, just a simple no. A small boundary. And everything changed. He didn't argue. He didn't push. He just went blank. Like I had suddenly become less interesting. Like I'd failed an invisible test. The praise vanished. The good mornings turned into ghost notifications. The man who once said he'd never let me go suddenly had one foot out the door and made sure I felt it. And when I asked what was wrong, he said, "You're just not as easygoing as I thought you were." That's how it happens. Not with an explosion, but with an accusation dressed as observation. Suddenly I was too much. Too needy. Too intense. Too emotional. I stared at the version of me he once worshipped and thought, what did I do wrong? But here's the truth. I hadn't changed. He had. Or maybe this was always who he was. And the version he showed me at the beginning was the lie. But I didn't see that then. All I saw was the shift. And it cracked something open inside me. And just when I was ready to pull away, just when I started to name the ache, he dropped a crumble. A throwback compliment. a message late at night, a memory of us that reminded me I was once adored. That's how the game is played. They don't drop you. They unhook you slowly. So you cling harder, not to them, but to the illusion of them, to the man who never existed. If you've lived through that switch, you know it's just painful. It's destabilizing. Because it's not just the person you miss. It's the certainty they fed you. The safety. The story. The way they made you feel chosen, cherished, rare. Until suddenly you weren't. One day you're a miracle, the next you're inconvenient. And the shift is so quiet, so strategic, you start to think it's your fault. You start performing, fixing, shrinking. Because the person who once stared at you like you were magic now stares through you. And you do anything to get that look back. That's the cruelty of the love bomb. It doesn't just bind you with affection. It teaches you to equate emotional survival with performance. If you're good, the warmth comes back. If you're compliant, the texts resume. If you self-abandon just enough, you might get the version of him that once made you feel chosen. But that version, that was the bait. And now you're hooked. Chasing a ghost, doubting your gut, apologizing for wounds you didn't cause. Because when the switch flips, it's not just about losing them. It's about losing the version of yourself you thought you finally loved the right way. You were the audience. You were the prize. You were the pawn. And if you still blame yourself for falling for it, this wasn't naivety. This was psychological warfare staged as love. Understanding this phase isn't just about understanding what happened to you. It's about seeing it clearly, naming it for what it is, and breaking the spell for good. Because love bombing isn't love. It's a loaded weapon. And it's the foundation of every hidden crime that follows. Let's get something clear right now. If you fell for the love bomb, it's not because you were naive. It's because you were human. Love bombing doesn't work because you're weak. It works because you're wired for connection. We're biologically built to respond to closeness, to safety, to love. When someone offers intensity that feels like certainty, your nervous system exhales. You feel seen, chosen, safe. And that safety, that's where the hook lands. Because a love bomb isn't chaos at first. It's not turbulence, it's peace, a carefully constructed, overwhelming sense of relief. Suddenly, someone understands you like no one else ever has. They ask the right questions. They echo your fears. They reflect your dreams back to you like a mirror, and you think, finally, someone gets it. Someone gets me. In your system, especially if you've lived through trauma, abandonment, or betrayal, latches on. Not out of desperation, but because it finally feels safe to land. But here's the danger. Love bombing mimics intimacy, but it's built on intensity. And intensity is not the same thing as love. Intensity makes your heart race. Love helps it settle. Intensity rushes you toward a future. Love sits beside you in the present. Intensity is addictive. Love is stable. But when someone floods you with affection, attention, and future fantasy, you don't have time to think. You only have time to feel. And that's by design. They're not falling in love with you. They're overwhelming you, bypassing your critical thinking, your gut, your sense of pacing. Because they're not offering connection. They're establishing control. And let's talk about the trauma layer. If you've survived abuse, neglect, or inconsistent love, you are more susceptible to love bombing. Not because you're broken, but because you learn to work for love. You learn to tolerate discomfort, to read between the lines, to over-explain, over-accommodate, and ignore the part of you that says, this is too fast. Because fast might still feel like safe. Especially if chaos was your baseline. That's not your fault. That's your nervous system trying to survive. Something it never should have had to normalize. Love bombing hijacks your healing. It imitates the thing you've always craved and then uses it against you. So if you ever ask yourself, why didn't I see it? Here's your answer. Because you were groomed to believe intensity was love. Because they didn't come at you with the red flags. They came cloaked in your deepest longings. And when someone hands you the fantasy you always hoped was real, your first instinct won't be to interrogate it. It will be to hold on. The setup wasn't random. It wasn't romantic. It was rehearsed. Because idealization always follows a pattern. And once you learn to see it, you'll never unsee it again. It starts with mirroring. They study you. They ask the right questions. They find out what you've survived, what you're proud of, what you secretly long for. And then they reflect it all back to you like a soulmate in a mirror. It feels intimate, but it's strategy. They're not building connection. They're collecting data. And that data, it gets used to design a version of themselves you can't help but fall for. someone who shares your values, your pace, your wounds, someone who just gets you. But that person isn't real. They're a projection, a mask crafted from your own vulnerability. And once you're pulled in, the tactics escalate. They talk about moving in, getting married, starting a business together, raising kids, retiring on a porch swing. They talk about forever. Before you've even had time to process now. That's not intimacy. That's invasion. They hijack your timeline and plant themselves in your future. Because if you believe the fantasy, you'll stay through the fallout. And they don't just build the future. They build a narrative, a myth. They call you their twin flame, their healing, their miracle. And if you've been through pain, especially abandonment or betrayal, the narrative hits like oxygen. Suddenly, your suffering had a purpose. Suddenly, you're being rewarded. But that story, it's not about you. It's about access. Access to your time, access to your energy, access to your empathy. Because once they are idolizing you, they know they can shape you. They can condition you. They can train you to work for their affection. And the moment you're hooked, they stop building the fantasy and start weaponizing it. Let's set the record straight. Love bombing isn't someone who's just bad at boundaries. It's not someone who falls too fast. It's not an anxious attachment style run wild. It's a calculated invasion. Because love bombing is not love. It's a psychological operation designed to gain access, build dependency, and secure control fast. And there's a blueprint behind it. They know exactly what they're doing, and it starts with the flood. From the jump, they hit hard. Endless texts, love notes, voicemails, good morning, good night. They want to know everything about you, your past, your pain, your dreams. It feels like fascination. It feels like connection, but it's data mining. They're taking inventory of your vulnerabilities so they can later disguise control as comfort. They don't want you to pace things. They want you disoriented. So you mistake adrenaline for bonding. So your nervous system starts to rely on them as regulator, rescuer, reward. That intensity, it isn't spontaneous. It's a smokescreen. They keep the momentum high because if you stop to catch your breath, you might notice you barely know them. You think you found someone who finally gets you. Same traumas, same music, same childhood stories. You finish each other's sentences. You feel seen on a level you've never felt before. But what you're feeling isn't resonance. It's replication. They're not connecting. They're reflecting. They study you. They mirror you. They mold themselves around your deepest emotional needs and make you feel like fate brought them to you. And it works. Because if you've never felt safe in love, this attention feels like safety, like arrival, like healing. But it's not real. They're not falling for you. They're falling into character. Once you're hooked on the rush, the future shows up. We'll grow old together. I've never met anyone like you. We're soulmates. We should move in. You're the one I've been waiting for. It's not romantic. It's rehearsed. And it's not about love. It's about control. Because if they can root themselves in your future, you're more likely to justify their behavior in the present. You'll overlook the emotional distance. You'll rationalize the contradiction. You'll keep chasing the fantasy, even as it starts to fracture. They want your imagination on lockdown. They want you believing that if you just stay patient, stay loyal, stay forgiving, the version of them you fell for will come back. But that version, it was never real. It was the hook, a costume, a character designed to secure your investment. Early on, they'll spill their pain. They've been cheated on, abandoned, mistreated. They'll tell you they've been hurt so badly, they don't know how to love right. But they're trying, you think. Finally, someone being emotionally honest. But what you're hearing is a preemptive alibi, an emotional disclaimer, because when they start harming you, you'll remember that sob story, and instead of walking away, you'll make excuses. They told you they had trauma. They warned you they were damaged. You'll mistake your harm for proof that they're getting closer to that real them. That's not vulnerability. That's manipulation. Love bombers don't pick just anyone. They don't carpet bomb affection. They profile. They're drawn to empathy, to strength, to people who are emotionally generous, self-reflective, and capable of deep connection. They don't want someone who will call them out. They want someone who will rationalize for them, someone who will believe in the best in them, long after they've shown the worst. If you're a fixer, a feeler, a forgiver, you're prime territory. Not because you're broken, but because they know you'll work harder to hold on. They give you just enough to stay. Right when you're doubting them, they drop a nostalgic message. Right when you start to pull away, they pour on the charm again. It's not consistency. It's intermittent reinforcement. The same tactic used by cult leaders and casinos. Keep the rewards random, and the subject will cling harder, not less. You think you're in a relationship, but you're in a system. One designed to condition you to crave your abuser. They're not confused. They're not messy. They're not just bad relationships. They're manufacturing intensity, withholding affection, and studying your response so they can tailor the perfect push-pull cycle. So if you're still asking, was it ever real? Did they even care? Was I just a fool? Here's the truth. It wasn't real. But you weren't a fool. You were targeted. And the version of them you're grieving, that was the bait, the story, the hook. It wasn't love. It was access strategy. What they gave you wasn't love. It was leverage. Let's be clear. What you experienced during the love bomb wasn't intimacy. It was imitation. It looked like closeness. It felt like depth. But it wasn't mutual. And it wasn't safe. It was false intimacy. Here's the difference. False intimacy is manufactured. Real intimacy is earned. False intimacy skips steps. Real intimacy takes time. False intimacy is loud, sweeping, consuming. Real intimacy is quiet, steady, respectful. False intimacy wants access. Real intimacy wants understanding. And if you've never been shown the difference, especially if you were raised around inconsistency or trauma, it makes sense that you mistook intensity for connection. That's not your fault. That's survival adapting. Because love bombing weaponizes your desire to be seen. It makes you feel fully known, when really, you've been scammed, not cherished. They didn't ask questions to get to know you. They asked questions to curate a performance. They didn't share secrets to build trust. They used vulnerability as a tool to get you to open wider, faster. What they gave you wasn't connection. It was leverage. And the most insidious part, it felt better than anything that came before it. That's what makes it addictive. That's what makes it disorienting. Because suddenly, someone sees all your pain and says, I love you more because of it. Suddenly, someone makes plans with you 5 years out when no one else even made it past month 3. Suddenly, someone tells you you're the safest place they've ever landed. And for a while, it feels like everything painful that came before finally makes sense. But then comes the shift. The silence, the criticism, the withdrawal. And you don't just lose the fantasy. You lose the version of yourself who felt finally loved. That's what false intimacy steals from you. Not just time, not just clarity, but certainty in your own worth. What does real intimacy look like? Let's name it. Let's anchor it. Let's burn the illusion to the ground. Real intimacy respects your pace. Real intimacy listens, not just to respond, but to witness. Real intimacy doesn't just comfort you in your pain. It allows space for you to grow without punishment. Real intimacy has boundaries. Real intimacy isn't afraid to slow down. Real intimacy doesn't need to convince you it's real. It just shows up. Consistently, quietly, honestly. Real love doesn't rush. Real love doesn't confuse. Real love doesn't perform. If what you experienced required you to shrink, to apologize for your needs, or to perform perfection just to stay adored, it wasn't intimacy. It was exposure. You weren't loved. You were leveraged. We don't talk enough about the grief that comes after idealization. Not the grief for the person, but for the version of you that existed in their story. Because when someone love bombs you, they don't just project an image of perfection onto themselves. They do it to you too. They put you on a pedestal. They call you rare, healing, divine. They say things like, "You're not like the others. You're the reason I believe again. You've changed me already." At first, it feels like honor. It feels like love. But it's not love. It's pressure. It's performance. It's fantasy. They don't want a real human. They want a mirror, one that reflects the story they're telling to themselves and to the world. And the moment you show edges, the moment you reveal needs, boundaries, insecurities, anger, the moment you show up as complex, human, three-dimensional, they start pulling away, or worse, they start rewriting the narrative. You go from healer to problem, from dream girl to drama queen, from everything they ever wanted to nothing they can handle. That's the theft. Idealization doesn't love the real you. It erases you. And when it ends, when the discard hits, you don't just feel rejected. You feel hollow. Because who were you really? Did they ever see you? Was any of it real? And the longer you stay in the aftershock, the more questions arise. Was I too much? Was I not enough? Did I imagine all of it? This is the psychological cost of being pedestalized. You start grieving a version of yourself that wasn't even yours. You start mourning a person who was only ever their invention. You didn't lose a relationship. You lost the illusion of mattering in the way they promised you did. And that messes with your wiring. You stop trusting your instincts. You start confusing red flags with butterflies. You second guess every desire for connection, every new spark, every what if, because now you've seen what it looks like to be worshipped and how quickly worship can turn to emotional execution. But let me say this clearly. You are not what they said you were. You are not what they withdrew from. You are not what they discarded. What they built wasn't you. What they destroyed wasn't you. You are what survived, and you are still worthy of being known fully, deeply, truly, without being turned into someone else's fantasy first. Let's take a breath here. Because everything we've unpacked today, it's heavy. It's confronting. It's probably brought up memories, emotions, and questions you didn't know were buried. But naming this matters. Naming what happened to you isn't just important, it's essential. Here's why. When someone idolizes you, love bombs you, and then withdraws, you're left holding a silent grief. A grief that society often dismisses because you weren't bruised or broken on the outside. But inside, you're carrying wounds that no one can see because the crime wasn't physical. It was psychological, emotional, spiritual. It was a crime against your identity, your autonomy, your trust in yourself. And that's why naming it is the first act of resistance. Because when you call it what it is, when you say clearly and loudly, that wasn't love, that was manipulation, you start to reclaim what they stole. They thrive in silence. They depend on confusion. They count on you never fully understanding the game they played. But when you name the idealization as intentional, when you see clearly that the pedestal was a trap, that the future faking was bait, that the mirroring was data collection, then suddenly you're no longer in their script. You're writing your own. Naming it interrupts the cycle. It burns the illusion to ashes. It puts the power back in your hands, the hands of the person who was targeted, but who survived anyway. And let's get something crystal clear. You were not naive. You were not weak. You were not foolish. You were human. You were hopeful. You were open. And someone used that openness against you. But that openness, that capacity to love deeply, authentically, and with vulnerability, that's still yours. They didn't destroy it. They borrowed it. And it's yours to reclaim whenever you're ready. Because here's the final truth of today's episode. The love you felt, the authenticity you offered, the care, the empathy, the commitment you poured out, that was never the mistake. That was never wrong. Their manipulation was wrong. Their deception was wrong. Their exploitation was wrong. You were never wrong for believing in love. And now that you know, now that you see clearly that what happened wasn't love, but a targeted campaign, you can rebuild something stronger, something safer, something real. That's what naming this crime does. It clears the space to rebuild trust, not just in others, but first in yourself. So if you take away only one thing from today's episode, let it be this. It wasn't love. It was a crime disguised as a promise. But now you know better. And knowing better is your exit. Knowing better is your freedom. That's it for today, bombshells. If your hands are shaking, if your breath is shallow, if your body feels like it's been remembering something before your mind can catch up, I want you to know that's not weakness. That's truth resurfacing. That's your nervous system finally recognizing the setup for what it was. And if this episode cracks something open, good. Let it. Because we don't heal by minimizing the impact. We heal by calling it what it was. We heal by dragging what was hidden into the light and saying, this happened. It was real, and it wasn't my fault. This isn't just a relationship podcast. This is a crime scene reconstruction. In every episode, we're gathering evidence. We're collecting language. We're reclaiming stories from the wreckage and rewriting them on our own terms. So if this hit home, share it. Send it to the version of you who needed it. Send it to a friend still stuck in the fog. Send it to the woman trying to love herself again through the shards of what he shattered. And if no one else has said this to you lately, let me be the one to say it loud and clear. You are not broken. You are not beyond repair. You are not to blame. You are a survivor of psychological warfare dressed up as love. And now you're something even more dangerous than a survivor. You're informed. You're angry. You're awake. You're a bombshell now. And we rise together. Until next time, L-bombs, keep your boundaries high, keep your standards higher, and keep your receipts somewhere safe.